So now we're going to take a look at the ELAC Alchemy DPA-2 Power Amp. Again, we have a IEC inlet for upgraded power cords as needed. We have a switch for line voltage, 115 or 230 volts. That allows you to select the voltage going to the linear power supply, which runs the analog stages of the amplifier. The switching power supply is actually universal voltage. It really doesn't need the voltage selector switch, but it's there for the linear side. We'll get back to that in a second. We have two pair of binding posts, lefts and rights, or if you use the amplifier in mono, you actually wire across this pair, and that is labeled on the back. Here we have vent holes for the heat sinks. We have trigger and trigger pass-through. So if you're using multiple amplifiers, trigger comes up from the preamp, goes into one, trigger output goes up to the next one, and on as many as you want to do. The amplifier has both balanced and unbalanced inputs, and you switch between them from the front panel. Internally, the product works in balanced mode, so we take the single-ended and turn it into balanced to drive the amplifiers. If we look at it from the inside now, switching power supply, and this is called a resonant mode converter, drives just the power amplifier modules. These are Class D modules. They're on customized heat sinks with very deep fins with smaller gaps between, so it's very efficient heat-wise. So not only is the amplifier better than 90% efficient as a module, with this heatsink they actually run really quite cool even at full power. And because we're using a switching power supply on those modules, the switching power supply demand is quite efficient. So when you're not taking much out of it, it runs very, very cool. When you're taking a lot out of it, it ramps itself up and then ramps itself back down when you're not. So the whole thing is quite power efficient as a system in your overall power consumption world. Plus it just doesn't get very hot. The linear supply here runs this section of half a dozen ultra low noise voltage regulators that power the left and right discrete FET and MOSFET driver stages. We use a series of hermetically sealed gold on gold relays to do the input selection here. We also use them for gain selection and stereo mono selection. And again, hermetically sealed so that they're not affected by environmental contamination, that they'll work as well today as they will 20 years from now. So this amplifier is fully DC coupled all the way through, meaning there's no interstage capacitors anywhere. There is what's called a DC servo that actively monitors the DC output from the driver stage and corrects for it. So you never can have large DC offsets coming out of the output jacks. The amplifier is capable of 325 watts a channel in stereo or 650 watts as a mono amplifier. Quite a lot of power for this very short chassis. And it sounds very dynamic and pretty authoritative, so you'd be very impressed. From the front panel, power switch, mute switch like we had before. You can do all connections with the amplifier on as long as it's in mute with no harm to anything. Input switching between inputs 1 and 2, mono mode switching, and remembering again when you put it in mono the wires have to change. There's no harm done. If you don't, you just won't hear the full signal. And then we do have a gain switch which changes the gain by 6 dB. If you're using an Alchemy preamp, there's no reason why you need to increase the gain. Some preamps don't put out enough output voltage to drive this amplifier to clipping, so we added an additional gain stage so you can accommodate other brands. And then the display in this case is a power meter, so which you can turn on and off as you prefer. It is a bar graph, so you have little bouncing pointers, and it is weighted so that you see quite a lot of motion in the first quarter, even at very low volume, so you know what's going on. And as gain increases, it is logarithmically changed so that at maximum power it's over here, and the last little bit is your maximum section. And it even tells you if it goes into clipping, because one of the things about Class D amplifiers is they clip they really don't clip until they start to clip a lot. And you don't have a lot of area to know, are you approaching clipping? So we actually tell you 3 dB before you start to clip that you're going to be clipping if you keep going like this. The amplifier also is protected from overdrive, overcurrent situations, and it will just simply shut itself off. That is the DPA-2 from Alchemy.